Edna Lewis was born in 1916 in Freetown, Virginia, a settlement built by formerly enslaved families who pooled their wages to buy back the soil they had once worked for free. By the time she published The Taste of Country Cooking in 1976, she had cooked her way through the Cafe Nicholson kitchen and fed editors and painters in New York. She knew every trick on this list by heart. Number 22 on this list saved a Memphis grandmother $3 a week in 1962. Number 14 was so old it had no English name. Number 6 on this list cost nothing because the pot did the work. These 25 tricks fed black families through Jim Crow, the Great Migration, and the lean Sundays when the rent man came twice. Hit subscribe before this list ends. Here are the 25 genius Big Mama Soul Kitchen tricks you will wish you knew sooner. Number 25, rinsing rice in cold water 3 times before it ever touches the pot. A blue speckled bowl on a porcelain sink in 1949 Charleston. Your Big Mama poured the long grain in, swirled it twice with her fingers, and tipped the cloudy water down the drain. She did it again, and then a third time until the water ran clear as a creek in March. What most people miss is that supermarket rice came dusted with talc and broken starch, the kind that'd turn a pot of clean white rice into glue by supper time. Edna Lewis wrote about this same trick in her notebooks from Freetown. The rice, once rinsed, sat in a cast iron pot with a pinch of salt and a tablespoon of bacon fat, simmered 18 minutes, and lifted off the spoon in single grains that held their shape under a ladle of Potlikker. Modern cooks call it gourmet technique. Your Big Mama called it Wednesday. Number 24, knocking the cast iron skillet to test the heat before the lard ever went in. A Kentucky kitchen in 1958. The pan had been her mother's, then her aunt's, then hers. Big Mama would drum the iron rim with the back of her wooden spoon and listen for the change in pitch, a low, ringing tone that said the pan was ready. Cold iron answered dull. Hot iron answered like a bell. Once the bell rang, she dropped a pinch of cornmeal into the dry pan. If the meal danced and browned in 3 seconds, the chicken went in. If it didn't, she waited a beat longer. There wasn't a thermometer, an infrared gun, or an app. There was a woman, an iron pan, and 40 years of knowing. The fried chicken came out crackling. The skin shattered. The meat was juicy enough to drip down the wrist of the child who ate it, standing at the counter. Year after year, that same pan rang the same bell. Number 23, rendering pork fat on a Sunday and pouring it into a coffee can for the rest of the week. A wood stove in Greenville, Mississippi, 1953. Your Big Mama cut 3 pounds of fat back into half-inch cubes, dropped them into a heavy pot with a 1/4 cup of water, and let the whole thing simmer over a low flame for 2 hours. The water cooked off, the fat melted out clear as honey. The crackling sank to the bottom, golden and crisp, ready to be salted and snacked on by any grandchild who wandered through. The clear lard went through a square of cheesecloth into a Maxwell House can on the back of the stove. That can fed her family every supper for a week and the next and the next. The thing is, modern science didn't walk back its warnings on lard until around 2010. By then, she'd been cooking with it for 60 years and had never seen the inside of a cardiologist's office. Number 22, soaking dry beans overnight with a teaspoon of baking soda in the water. A Memphis kitchen in 1962. Big Mama dropped a pound of dried pintos into a chipped enamel bowl, covered them with cold water, and stirred in a single teaspoon of soda from the orange box on the shelf. The beans drank the water, the skins softened. The soda neutralized the gas compounds that had ruined a Sunday afternoon. By morning, the beans had doubled in size. She drained them, rinsed them once, and simmered them with a smoked ham hock and 1 chopped onion. The pot took 90 minutes instead of 4 hours. She saved gas, she saved time, she saved your granddaddy the embarrassment of a long car ride home from church. The trick traveled with her family from Tennessee to Detroit during the Great Migration, and her granddaughter was still doing it in a Cleveland apartment in 1991. Number 21, salting the meat the night before you cook. It, a Birmingham kitchen in 1955. Big Mama unwrapped a pork shoulder from the butcher paper and rubbed kosher salt deep into the fat cap with both hands. She covered it loose with a dish towel and slid it onto the cool side of the icebox. By morning, the salt had drawn the moisture to the surface, then pulled it back in along with every grain of seasoning. The meat cooked tender enough to fall off the bone with the back of a fork. Restaurant chefs would later call this a dry brine and write whole books about it. Big Mama called it leaving the meat alone overnight. She had learned the same trick from her own grandmother, who had learned it on a tobacco farm in 1898. The salt did the same work in every kitchen. The patience was the seasoning. Number 20, dropping a clean copper penny into the greens pot to keep the color bright. A Sunday afternoon in Macon, Georgia, 1948. The collards had been picked from the garden that morning, the stems stripped, the leaves stacked and rolled and sliced into ribbons. Big Mama dropped them into the pot with a smoked turkey neck, a splash of cider vinegar, and a single Lincoln penny scrubbed bright with a slice of lemon. The greens cooked 2.5 hours. The copper held the green pigment in the leaves, so the pot came out emerald instead of army drab. She fished the penny out with a slotted spoon before serving and dropped it back into the cleaning jar by the sink. Modern cookbooks tell you to skip this trick because they're worried about leaching. Your Big Mama would tell you a clean penny in a clean pot for 2 hours never killed a soul, and the greens still tasted like Sunday. Number 19, the cornmeal dredge, done twice with a 5-minute rest between coats. A Tuesday supper in 1961 Atlanta, the kitchen window opened to a thunderstorm rolling off Stone Mountain. Big Mama had 3 plates set out on the counter. The first held buttermilk, thick and tangy, a splash of hot sauce stirred in. The second held seasoned flour, salt, pepper, garlic powder, and a heavy pinch of paprika. The third held white cornmeal mixed with the same seasonings. She dipped each piece of catfish into the buttermilk, then rolled it through the flour, then back into the buttermilk a second time, then into the cornmeal. She set every dredged fillet on a wire rack over a plate and walked away for exactly 5 minutes. The first coat hydrated, the second coat dried into the first. By the time the lard hit 365 degrees in the iron skillet, the crust was already half locked on. She fried each fillet 2 minutes aside. The crust came out shattering crisp, golden as a Carolina sunset, sealed so tight that not a drop of oil reached the white flesh underneath. She learned the trick from a fish fry on the Pearl River when she was 11 years old. The man running the fryer was an oyster man from Biloxi who'd been frying mullet for 40 years. He told her the rest is the recipe. The buttermilk and the meal are just paint. The rest is what holds the picture together. The part few people talk about is that Big Mama passed it on to her 3 daughters and 7 granddaughters, one by one, every Friday night. One of them is still doing it in a kitchen in Charlotte, and her grandchildren can't eat fast food fish without saying it tastes like soggy cardboard. The trick is older than the supermarket. It's older than the deep fryer. It's as old as a black grandmother who refused to serve her family anything less than glass. Number 18, finishing the gravy with a tablespoon of cold butter swirled in off the heat. A Thanksgiving morning in 1957, Charlotte. The roasting pan held 2 cups of dark drippings and a slurry of flour and water whisked smooth. Big Mama brought it to a simmer scraped every brown bit off the bottom, and turned the burner off. Then she dropped a cold pat of butter, half the size of a matchbox, into the center of the gravy and swirled the pan in a slow circle. The butter melted as it moved. The fat coated the starch molecules. The gravy turned glossy and thick, the kind of finish a French chef would call mounted with butter and charge you $80 for at a hotel. Big Mama called it the last shine. She did the same thing to the Potlikker, the red-eyed gravy, and the pan sauce. The trick cost 3 cents and made every plate look like the cover of a magazine. Number 17, smothering meat in its own. Steam under a heavy lid for 90 minutes. A Saturday afternoon in 1952, New Orleans, the rain coming sideways off Lake Pontchartrain. Big Mama browned 6 pork chops in bacon grease, lifted them out, and dropped 2 sliced onions into the same pan. The onions melted. She poured in 2 cups of water, set the chops back in the pan, and clamped the lid down tight. The fire went to a whisper. The meat cooked in its own steam for 90 minutes. The onions broke down into a mahogany gravy. The chops came out tender enough to cut with the side of a fork. Edna Lewis wrote about smothering as the heart of country cooking. The technique wasn't a recipe. It was a relationship between heat, water, and patience. Modern cooks rush the same dish in a slow cooker and wonder why the meat tastes flat. Big Mama could have told them. The lid is the secret. The time is the seasoning. The patience is the love. Number 16, scrambling eggs in a cold pan over the lowest possible flame. A Sunday breakfast in 1959 Detroit, the radio playing Mahalia Jackson. Big Mama cracked 4 eggs into a cold cast iron skillet, dropped a tablespoon of butter into the center, and turned the burner to its lowest setting. She stirred the eggs slow with a wooden spoon, never lifting the pan, never raising the heat. 8 minutes later, the eggs came out the color of fresh cream, soft as custard, the curds barely formed. She salted them at the end. She served them on a slice of buttered toast with a side of fried apples. Here's the thing, a French chef in Manhattan would later teach his cooks the same exact technique and charge $34 for the plate. Big Mama charged a kiss on the cheek and a thank you, ma'am. The eggs were better than anything in any restaurant for one simple reason. She cooked them like she meant it. Number 15, brining the chicken in salted water with a bay leaf for 4 hours before frying. A Friday afternoon in 1963 Jackson, Mississippi. Big Mama mixed a 1/4 cup of kosher salt into a 1/2 gallon of cold water, dropped 2 bay leaves into the brine, and submerged a cut-up chicken in the bowl. She covered it and left it on the cool tile floor of the pantry for 4 hours. The salt traveled into every fiber of meat. The water locked itself in. By the time she dredged the chicken through her seasoned flour, the meat was already 1/3 of the way to perfect. She fried it in lard at 350 degrees for 14 minutes. The skin came out the color of a Carolina pine cone. The white meat was juicy enough to leave a slick on the plate. Her grandchildren would tell you nobody since has ever made fried chicken that good. Number 14, the long burn on a single onion for the base of every gravy and pot of beans. A Wednesday evening in 1955 Birmingham, Big Mama set a heavy bottom pot over a low flame, dropped in 2 tablespoons of bacon grease, and added 1 yellow onion sliced thin from root to tip. She didn't touch it for 8 minutes. Then she stirred it once and walked away again. She came back 10 minutes later. She stirred it once more. The onions slowly turned from white to gold, then from gold to amber, then from amber to a deep mahogany, the color of a wet log on a forest floor. The whole process took 45 minutes. She used the time to peel potatoes, snap green beans, and pull a pan of cornbread out of the oven. By the time the onions were done, the bottom of the pot was glazed with a brown crust she called the soul of the dish. She poured in a quart of chicken stock and scraped every speck of that crust into the liquid. The stock turned the color of strong tea. She added 2 cups of soaked beans, a smoked ham hock, and a pinch of cayenne. The pot simmered for 2 hours. The result was a bowl of beans so deep in flavor that no amount of seasoning packets could ever touch it. Edna Lewis wrote about this same technique in 1988, 20 years after Big Mama had been doing it without writing it down. The French call it caramelizing. Big Mama called it letting the onion tell you when it's ready. One thing I noticed reading her notebooks is that the trick was never about the onion. It was about the willingness to stand at a stove and wait. A grandmother who wouldn't rush a single onion would never serve her family a thin pot of beans, and her granddaughters could taste the difference between a pot built on patience and a pot built on a packet of mix from the grocery shelf. Generation after generation, the trick traveled. The time stayed the same. Number 13, flour dredging in paper bags was the mess-free technique Black grandmothers perfected for coating chicken, fish, and pork chops. Seasoned flour went into a large brown paper bag along with pieces of meat. The bag was folded closed, then shaken vigorously until every piece wore an even coat. Children often helped with the shaking, turning kitchen work into something playful. The paper absorbed excess moisture while distributing flour evenly without creating countertop disaster. When finished, the bag went straight into trash, leaving nothing to wash. The technique worked because confined space and agitation coated every surface. Some grandmothers added secret spice blends to the flour, creating proprietary mixtures that defined their signature fried foods. The paper bag method was practical genius that delivered perfectly coated results. Number 12, scoring the country ham across the fat in a diamond pattern before it ever hit the oven. A Christmas morning in 1950, Charleston, Big Mama set a 6-pound country ham on a wooden board, took her sharpest paring knife and cut shallow slashes in the fat cap, first one direction, then the other, until the surface was crossed with diamonds half an inch apart. She studded each diamond with a single whole clove. She brushed the whole ham with a glaze of brown sugar, mustard powder, and a splash of bourbon. The ham went into a slow oven for 3 hours. The fat rendered, the cloves perfumed the kitchen, the glaze caramelized into a dark crackling crust that lifted off in shards when she carved it. The diamond cuts let the heat and the glaze reach every corner of the meat. Restaurant chefs charged $60 a plate for the same trick. Big Mama served it on a Sunday platter with a side of red eye gravy and a stack of biscuits the size of her grandson's fist. Number 11, chilling the biscuit dough for 30 minutes before cutting and baking. A Thursday morning in 1956, Memphis. Big Mama mixed her flour, baking powder, salt, and a half cup of cold lard with her fingertips until the dough came together in coarse crumbs. She poured in a cup of cold buttermilk, stirred it 10 times, turned the dough out onto a floured board, and folded it over itself 3 times. Then she wrapped it in a damp towel and slid it into the icebox for half an hour. The cold relaxed the gluten. The fat firmed up into pebbles inside the dough. When she rolled it out and cut the biscuits with a tin can rim, every layer was distinct. The biscuits went into a hot oven and rose 4 inches tall, splitting along their seams like a book opening. The crust shattered, the inside steamed, a pat of butter melted into every bite. Now the trick was the chill. The chill was the biscuit. The biscuit was breakfast for a kitchen of 9 grandchildren who didn't know they were poor because they were warm and full. Number 10, pouring a cup of strong coffee into the red eye gravy at the very end. A Tuesday morning in 1944 Norfolk, Big Mama fried 2 slabs of country ham in a black skillet. She lifted the ham out. The pan held a 1/4 inch of dark drippings, shot through with the salt of the cure. She poured a full cup of black coffee straight from the percolator into the hot pan. The pan hissed. The coffee deglazed every brown bit off the bottom. She stirred it for 30 seconds. The gravy turned the color of mahogany. She poured it over the ham and a stack of grits. The bitterness of the coffee balanced the saltiness of the cure. Her grandfather had been cooking it the same way since 1898. He had learned it from a Pullman porter who had learned it from a tobacco farm cook in 1880. The trick is older than the railroad. Number 9, frying the cornbread batter directly on a hot greased iron skillet for crispy edges. A Saturday supper in 1958 Tuscaloosa. Big Mama heated 3 tablespoons of bacon grease in her cast iron skillet until the fat shimmered and a drop of water danced and spat off the surface. She poured the cornmeal batter straight into the screaming hot pan. The edges sizzled and locked the moment the batter hit the iron. The bottom turned a deep golden brown in 8 minutes. She slid the whole skillet into a 400-degree oven for 15 minutes more. When she flipped the cornbread out onto a wooden board, the crust was a 1/2 inch thick on the bottom and the edges crackling crisp, the inside still tender as a pillow. Her grandchildren fought over the corner pieces every time. The trick was the hot pan. The hot pan was the difference between cornbread and a cake. Big Mama didn't confuse the two. Number 8, buttermilk soaking before frying was the tenderizing secret that made Black grandmother's fried chicken legendary across the South. Chicken pieces went into bowls of tangy buttermilk for hours or overnight, the acid working slowly to break down tough fibers while adding subtle flavor. The buttermilk also helped flour coating adhere better, creating thicker crust that stayed put during frying. Some grandmothers added hot sauce or garlic to their buttermilk baths. Children would peer into refrigerators at bowls of soaking chicken, anticipating the meal to come. When soaked pieces met seasoned flour, the wet surface grabbed coating eagerly. The science was simple. Acid tenderizes protein, but results seemed like magic. This patient technique separated Sunday dinner chicken from everyday meals. Number 7, finishing the candied yams with a splash of orange juice and a knob of butter. A Christmas afternoon in 1961 Mobile. Big Mama had peeled and sliced 6 pounds of sweet potatoes and laid them in a heavy pan with a stick of butter, a cup of brown sugar, a pinch of cinnamon, and a 1/4 teaspoon of nutmeg. The yams cooked covered for 40 minutes until they were tender. Then she pulled the lid, raised the heat, and let the syrup reduce. At the very end, she poured in a 1/4 cup of fresh orange juice from a sun-kiss she had squeezed by hand and dropped a final pat of cold butter on top. She stirred once. The syrup turned glossy, the sugar caramelized, the orange brightened every flavor on the plate. She served it next to the ham and the greens, the steam rising off the platter as she carried it to the table. Her grandchildren would later tell you that no Thanksgiving since has ever tasted right because no one else thought to add the orange. Number 6, soaking salt pork in cold water for an hour before adding it to the greens. A Sunday afternoon in 1953 Augusta, Big Mama unwrapped a chunk of salt pork from the butcher paper, dropped it in a bowl of cold water, and set it on the windowsill. The water drew off the harsh edge of the salt. By the time she fished the pork out and dropped it in the pot of collards, the meat seasoned the greens without overpowering them. She learned the trick from her grandmother, who'd been cooking with salt pork on a tenant farm in 1908. The pork was cheap, the water was free, the hour cost her nothing. The pot of greens came out balanced, savory, and rich enough that your grandchildren licked the potlikker out of the bottom of the bowl with hunks of cornbread. The trick saved a generation of Southern kitchens from greens too salty to eat. Number 5, the crowding prevention method was fundamental knowledge that determined whether fried foods emerged crispy or soggy. African American cooks understood that adding too many pieces to hot oil dropped the temperature dramatically, causing food to steam rather than fry. They worked in small batches, often 3 or 4 pieces at a time, maintaining high heat necessary for proper crust formation. This patience contradicted the desire to finish quickly, but results justified the extra time. Between batches, cooks allowed oil to return to proper temperature before adding more food. Some used the bread test repeatedly throughout cooking to monitor heat. The method required standing at the stove longer, but families who rushed learned quickly that crowded pans produced limp, greasy food. Number 4, stirring a pinch of baking soda into the buttermilk before mixing the cake batter. A Friday afternoon in 1948, Memphis. Big Mama poured a cup of buttermilk into a mason jar, added a half teaspoon of baking soda, and watched the whole jar foam to the rim like a glass of root beer. She poured the foaming liquid into her cake batter and mixed it gently. The reaction lightened the batter and gave the cake a tender crumb that melted on the tongue. Here's the thing. The acid in the buttermilk needed a base to react with, and the baking soda gave the cake its lift. The cake came out an inch taller than the same recipe made without the trick. She frosted it with a caramel icing thick enough to stand a fork in. Her grandchildren still talk about that cake at family reunions, 60 years after she stopped baking it. Number 3, adding a tablespoon of vinegar to the pot of pinto beans halfway through the cooking. A Tuesday supper in 1959, Macon. Big Mama had a pot of pintos simmering on the back burner with a smoked turkey wing, a chopped onion, and a clove of garlic. About an hour in, she lifted the lid, splashed in a tablespoon of cider vinegar from the green glass bottle on the shelf, and stirred it once. The acid brightened every flavor in the pot. The beans tasted deeper. The smoke from the turkey wing tasted clearer. The onion tasted sweeter. She served the beans over a slab of cornbread with a dab of pepper jelly on top. Her grandchildren cleaned the bowl every time. The vinegar cost 5 cents. The flavor was priceless. The trick was the kind of thing your Big Mama would never tell you to write down because she assumed any cook with sense would already know it. Number 2, salting the cucumbers and letting them sit before they ever touch the vinegar. A July afternoon in 1962, Greenwood, the heat off the asphalt thick enough to chew. Big Mama sliced 6 cucumbers, paper thin on a wooden mandolin, layered them in a glass bowl with a heavy pinch of salt between each layer, and set a saucer on top with a bowl of water as a weight. An hour later, the cucumbers had given up half their water. She drained the bowl, rinsed the slices once, and tossed them with cider vinegar, sugar, and a thin slice of red onion. The salt had drawn the water out. The vinegar could now do its work without being diluted. The pickles came out crisp, sharp, and balanced enough to serve at any Sunday dinner. She made a quart at a time and kept it in a mason jar in the icebox. The jar lasted 3 days. Her grandchildren ate them like candy. Number 1, the secret she would only tell you when you stood at her stove with your own children grown. A kitchen in 1972, Atlanta. Big Mama wiped her hands on a flour sack apron, looked at her granddaughter, and said the only thing that ever mattered: cook for the people you love, and they will eat what you cook. Salt it like you mean it. Stir it like you have time. Taste it before you serve it. Do not use a recipe to hide from the food. The food knows. The food will tell you what it needs if you stand still long enough to listen. She had spent 50 years at a stove and fed 3 generations through 2 wars. The trick was never the rice rinse or the cornmeal dredge. The trick was the woman who showed up every day and did the work as if every plate was the most important plate in the world. That was the secret. That will stay the secret as long as one black grandmother stands at one cast iron skillet on one Sunday afternoon and feeds the people she loves. There was no thermometer clipped to the side of the pot, no digital readout blinking on the counter. She knew the oil was ready because she heard it, a flick of water from wet fingertips, a tiny crackle of flour pinched and dropped from above, or just the sound the grease made when it hit that precise shimmer, a low hiss shifting into a sharp, confident pop the moment something touched the surface. That sound meant 350 degrees, give or take, and she was never wrong. Kids learned to stay back when the popping started. They also learned to listen, because one day they would stand over that pot themselves. The women who fried fish on Friday nights could judge temperature by ear, the way a piano tuner judges pitch, and the chicken that came out of their oil was golden every single time. Nobody fries with that same ear anymore, because nobody stands close enough long enough to learn. There was always a tin. It sat near the burner, dented and dark, with a lid that never quite closed right, and it was one of the most important pieces of equipment in the kitchen. Every time something came out of a pan, the drippings went in, the fat from salt pork, the leavings after the sausage was done, the amber oil left after cornbread came out. By the end of the week, that tin held a layered history of everything cooked, and it was the starting fat for nearly everything baked. Bacon grease keeps baked goods from sticking in a way butter never can. The smoke point is higher, the flavor deeper, and the way it coats seasoned cast iron before baking creates a seal that Crisco or spray oil cannot replicate. African American families across the South carried this practice from the 19th century straight through the 1970s. The ones who kept their tin long after health trends said otherwise. Their cornbread tasted different, richer, like something had been built into it slowly over years, because it had. Number 22, smoke curing with green hickory. In the smokehouse behind nearly every black homestead in the rural South, hams and shoulders hung from rafters above a smothering pit of green hickory wood. The smoke was not just for flavor, it was chemistry in the air, invisible and exact. The phenols in wood smoke acted as antioxidants that slowed fat breakdown. The formaldehyde and acetic acid lowered the pH on the surface of the meat, creating an antimicrobial barrier that worked around the clock. A properly smoked ham lasted an entire year hanging in that smokehouse. The USDA declared backyard smokehouses unsanitary in the mid-20th century because temperatures could not be precisely controlled. But the compounds in hickory smoke do the same work whether you monitor them with a thermometer or not. Your grandfather knew the smoke was ready when it smelled right. He read that smokehouse the way a doctor reads a chart. He could not name a single phenol. He did not need to. Before nonstick coatings and ceramic pans lined every shelf, there was cast iron, heavy and black, and passed down like jewelry. The trick was never a single act of seasoning, but years of daily use, layer after layer of rendered fat bonding to the iron through heat and repetition, building a surface so slick that eggs slid across it like water on glass. Your grandmother never read about polymerized oil. She just knew. She knew you never put soap in that skillet, never let it sit in water, never handed it to someone who did not understand. After cooking, she wiped it clean with a rag, set it back on the burner to dry, then rubbed a thin coat of grease inside before putting it away. That pan held the memory of 10,000 meals, and every one of them made the next one better. When she died, the skillet was worth more than anything else in the kitchen, not for what it cost, but for what it carried. No buttermilk meant a 10-second fix. You took whatever milk was left, poured a cup, added a tablespoon of white vinegar or lemon juice, stirred it twice, and let it sit for 5 minutes. What came back was close enough in chemistry to do the job. The acid had begun curdling the milk protein slightly, creating the tangy consistency that activates baking soda the way true buttermilk does. The acid-base reaction between buttermilk and baking soda is what produces the rise in quick breads. Carbon dioxide bubbles from chemistry, not just heat. African American bakers in the rural South, especially during the 1940s and 50s, when fresh buttermilk wasn't always available, knew this substitution by instinct. They didn't need a food chemistry textbook. They needed biscuits on the table by 6 in the morning, and the vinegar trick made that possible with whatever was left in the house. The number 25, salt box pork curing. Before refrigeration reached black homes in the rural South, salt was the only thing standing between your family and hunger. A hog was slaughtered in November when the air turned cold. Every cut was rubbed thick with coarse salt and stacked in a wooden box, layer after layer, like bricks in a wall, with salt packed between each piece. The meat sat for weeks, drawing moisture out through osmosis until bacteria could not survive on its surface. That box was the family's bank account in meat. The USDA later said this method was unreliable because home cooks could not measure salinity precisely enough. But food scientists at Texas A&M have confirmed that salt concentrations above 6% create conditions where salmonella and E. coli cannot reproduce. Your great-grandmother did not own a salinity meter. She used her hands and her mother's memory. The pork lasted through March. That was enough. Whoever got that pan got her hands. Stewed tomatoes could turn sharp and sour if you let them, especially the ones canned at the end of summer when the fruit came in fast and acidic. The fix was a pinch of sugar, sometimes 2, stirred in while the pot was still bubbling. It did not make the tomatoes sweet. It rounded them out, pulled back that bite that sat on the back of your tongue. This trick showed up in spaghetti sauce, ladled over white rice, in tomato gravy, spooned across biscuits, in the base of any stew where canned tomatoes formed the backbone. She never explained why it worked. She just tapped the sugar bowl with a teaspoon, let a little fall in, stirred once, and tasted. If you asked, she might say the tomatoes were angry and needed calming down. That was all the science you were going to get. You could hear it before you saw it. The moment that batter hit the iron, there was a sound, a hard, immediate sizzle, like the pan was sealing a deal, and you knew the crust was already forming on the bottom before the top had even set. That sound was the trick. The cast iron had been heating in the oven for at least 10 minutes, and when cold batter touched that surface, the fat drove moisture into instant steam, puffing the inside while the outside crisped. This is why cornbread baked in a cold dish and cornbread baked in a screaming hot cast iron are two entirely different creatures from the exact same batter. African American cooks across the South understood this long before food science had a word for it. The skillet went in first always, and the batter went in last. You poured fast because every second of contact between cold batter and hot iron was building that crust. The dark gold bottom, slightly smoky from the seasoned surface, that was not an accident. That was something learned by listening. Number 20, buttermilk soaking. Before you cook tough cuts of meat or wild game, you soak them in buttermilk overnight. Black women across the South knew this trick so deeply that it was never written down in any recipe. It lived in the hands, not on paper. The buttermilk tenderized the meat and extended its usable life by a full day or more. A tough piece of squirrel or rabbit that would have been like chewing rope came out of that buttermilk bath, soft enough to fall apart on the fork. Health departments said raw meat sitting in unrefrigerated buttermilk was a breeding ground for pathogens. They missed the point entirely. The lactic acid bacteria in buttermilk produce antimicrobial compounds, including bacteriocins and hydrogen peroxide. The pH drops low enough to inhibit harmful bacteria, while the enzymes break down tough connective tissue. Science now calls this biopreservation. Your grandmother called it getting the meat ready. Same process, different vocabulary. Round steak cost next to nothing at the butcher counter because it was tough as shoe leather and nobody with money wanted it. But a woman with a box of Arm & Hammer and 40 minutes of patience could turn that slab into something that fell apart on the fork. A teaspoon of baking soda rubbed into the surface, left to sit for half an hour, then rinsed clean before seasoning. The alkaline powder raised the pH just enough to keep the proteins from seizing up tight during cooking, leaving the fibers loose and tender even over high heat. Nobody in those kitchens used the word pH. They just knew that a little soda and a little time could make a cheap cut taste like it came from a different animal. The same trick worked on stew meat cubed small and browned hot, turning what should have been chewy into something that melted into the gravy. That box of baking soda earned its place on the shelf 10 times over. Time equals 1 second. White sugar does one thing. Brown sugar does 3. It sweetens, yes, but it also holds moisture. The molasses in brown sugar is hygroscopic, pulling water from the air and keeping baked goods softer longer. And it brings depth that refined white sugar cannot deliver. Something slightly caramel, the taste of the cane before all the complexity was processed away. African American bakers used brown sugar in sweet potato pies, in cornbread, and layer cakes long before the rest of American baking caught up. During the Depression and war years, when white sugar was rationed and tight, brown sugar was both cheaper and more available, and the baked goods from those kitchens were richer for it. Light brown sugar gives warmth. Dark brown gives depth close to molasses. The women who knew which to reach for never needed to explain why. Number 21, vinegar pepper sauce. Every kitchen table in the Black South had a bottle of vinegar with hot peppers floating inside. It was not a condiment, it was a preservation system disguised as a table sauce. The peppers released capsaicin into the vinegar over time, creating a solution with both antimicrobial and antioxidant properties. You shook it over greens, beans, rice, or anything that needed brightening. When the vinegar ran low, you poured more in. The same peppers lasted for months, sometimes years. Some families passed the same bottle down through an entire growing season, refilling it the way you top off a gas tank. Food safety officials warned against storing peppers in vinegar at room temperature because the pH might not be low enough to prevent botulism. But vinegar sits at a pH between 2.4 and 3.4, well below the 4.6 threshold where Clostridium botulinum can grow. The science was on your grandmother's side the entire time. She just never got the credit. If the sound of hot grease was the first lesson, the sink full of greens was the second. Nobody skipped the washing, and nobody washed them only once. Collards came in from the garden or the market with grit buried in every fold, tiny grains of sand that no amount of shaking could remove, and sometimes a caterpillar curled tight against a stem. The first wash was cold water and a splash of vinegar, leaves pulled apart and swirled until the water turned brown. Drain, fill again. Second wash, same thing. Slower now, each leaf turned over and inspected. Third wash, and if the water still showed dirt, a fourth. Some women soaked the greens in salt water for an hour before the washing even started. You never rushed it. A single grain of sand in a finished pot could ruin Sunday dinner, and the woman who served gritty greens would hear about it for years. That ritual at the sink was not cleaning. It was preparation, patience, and proof that you respected the people who were going to eat. Nobody who grew up in one of these kitchens ever saw a measuring cup used for measuring. A palm of flour, a pour of buttermilk that looked right against the bowl, a pinch of salt tested between two fingers. This was precision of a different kind, built over years of baking the same things in the same cast iron until the hands knew more than any card could say. In West African culinary tradition, cooking by ratio and feel rather than fixed measurement was standard practice for centuries, and it traveled with the Great Migration into northern kitchens that had never heard of it. The trick is understanding relationships, not amounts. More fat means more tenderness, more acid means more rise. The women who never needed to write anything down had memorized chemistry without calling it that, and if you were lucky enough to stand beside one long enough, she handed you something no recipe card can hold. Number 24, Potlikker preservation. When your grandmother boiled collard greens with a ham hock for 3 hours, the liquid left behind was not waste. It was medicine in a mason jar. She saved that greenish broth, rich as liquid gold, poured it into jars, and kept it on the back porch in winter or the root cellar in summer. Families drank it straight or sopped it with cornbread. Extension agents told black families to throw the cooking water away because boiling destroyed the vitamins. They were half right and completely wrong. Researchers in Spain found that boiling extracted 50% of total flavonoids and 60% of vitamin C into the cooking liquid. The vitamins were not destroyed. They migrated into the potlikker like passengers changing trains. The women who saved that broth were capturing every nutrient the greens had to give. They did not need a study to know it kept their children strong through winter. These tricks were never written down because they were never meant to leave the kitchen. They moved from a mother to a daughter, from an aunt to a niece, from a grandmother to a granddaughter standing on a step stool at the counter watching the rice rinse 3 times. Try one this week. Pick the cornbread or the smothered chops or the long burn on the onion. Cook it slow. Sit at the table when you eat it, not the couch. Share which trick your big mama taught you in the comments. I want to know if her brine was different from Edna Lewis. Tell us where your people are from. These tricks are how a community fed itself when the world made it hard. They are still that